Go placidly amid the noise and haste, and remember what peace there may be in silence. As far as possible, without surrender, be on good terms with all persons. Speak your truth quietly and clearly, and listen to others, even the dull and the ignorant. They too have their story. Avoid loud and aggressive persons. They are vexations of the spirit. If you compare yourself with others, you may become vain and bitter, for always there will be greater and lesser persons than yourself. Enjoy your achievements as well as your plans. Keep interested in your own career, however humble. It is a real possession in the changing fortunes of time. Exercise caution in your business affairs, for the world is full of trickery. But let this not blind you to what virtue there is. Many persons strive for high ideals, and everywhere life is full of heroism. Be yourself. Especially do not feign affection. Neither be cynical about love, for in the face of all aridity and disenchantment, it is as perennial as the grass. Take kindly the counsel of the years, gracefully surrendering the things of youth. Nurture strength of spirit to shield you in sudden misfortune, but do not distress yourself with dark imaginings. Many fears are born of fatigue and loneliness. Beyond a wholesome discipline, be gentle with yourself. You are a child of the universe. No less than the trees and the stars, you have a right to be here. And whether or not it is clear to you, no doubt the universe is unfolding as it should. Therefore, be at peace with God, whatever you conceive him to be, and whatever your labors and aspirations. In the noisy confusion of life, keep peace with your soul. With all its sham, drudgery, and broken dreams, it is still a beautiful world. Be cheerful. Strive to be happy.
So tell me about your first experience coming into UUCCI and what is
the fresh air. That's what I think it is. I love it.
I think I could summarize probably our background here. When we first came to town, we visited all the churches, and as most people in town in 1960, when we came, we went to First Christian Church. It was quite big. A longtime minister there, Ed Smith, ran everything with an iron fist. And we got there about the time he and Erwin Miller had some differences, and Ed was not the winner of that. And that's when Erwin started North Christian. We attended that till about 10 years ago. John Bean was minister most of that time.
The church was packed when he was there.
And then he retired in the around 2000. We went through several ministers short term. And by about 10 years ago, we got disenchanted with some of the goings on there. Once again, visited all the churches, ended up very impressed with the Unitarian and started going there regularly.
His second cousin designed the church. Frank Adams is his cousin.
Frank Adams, who designed the church, I knew of him. My mother talked about his father, who was also Frank Adams, but I had never met him. We did not visit with.
They went to North Christian. He went to North Christian too.
But Frank came in my office one day for a medical consult, and in chatting a bit, we discovered we were cousins. Mm-hmm. So that's really how we made contact again and became good friends.
I was born in Ohio. I'm a Buckeye, and till I was in 6th grade, I lived in Ohio all the time. My grandparents were a tremendous influence in my life. I dearly loved them, and I learned so much from them. My grandma baked every Saturday and cleaned chickens for people out of Dayton, came out to get her chickens, and sometimes she had as many as 14 chickens to clean, and they were scrubbed. There was never a pin feather there. Then she baked donuts and cookies and everything else, and always had a big breakfast. My grandpa had eggs every single day and bacon and just enormous, and he was skinny as a rail. And I didn't get that part of the genes. So anyway, we learned a lot. And my other grandpa lived a mile away. He was a country doctor, and I would go up there. My brother and I walked a mile along the road up to Phillipsburg, Ohio, and I would count out pills for him into envelopes, or pour cough medicine from a gallon jug into 4 and 6 ounce bottles. And he took my cousin's tonsils out one day in the office, and my grandma did drip ether with the mask, and I sat on the table pulling big chunks of cotton off of a great big roll. So that was my first surgery experience. My grandmother's church was Church of the Brethren, where the men sat on one side and the women on the other. And every year they had dinner. It was just broth with boiled potatoes. And then when it was all finished, they washed each other's feet. So I participated in that too, and that was something that I will remember, part of my base. My grandpa, that was on the farm, had a couple of years of college. He delivered mail first on horseback and then on a motorcycle. And he had a Ford car, one of those where you went up and down to make it go faster. And we would drive that around. My brother and I drove the tractors around in the field. So we had tremendous experience in butchering, making their own lye soap, and raised a garden and had chickens or eggs. So that was a pretty solid background for me. We moved to Danville, Indiana. I finished high school there and had lots of good friends. Went into Bloomington 1 year, pre-nursing course, and then 3 years at the medical center. And that is where Walt and I met. I was working on the men's medical floor at midnight, and one of the patients needed IV medication, and I couldn't do that, so I called the medical student on call. And guess who that was?
She made the initial call, not me.
A week later, he called me for a date. This was in July. We went to a movie, and then we dated some more. In December, we got engaged, and in May, we got married. So that was less than a year that we had been, but we were both raised about the same way.
I was raised on a farm about 2 miles west of Seymour. Rode my bike in and back and forth to high school all the time. Elementary school was at Casting School on the southwest side of Seymour. In 1942, that school was in the land that was turned into Freeman Field, an Air Force field that was, or at that time Army Air Force Field, developed at that time to train bomber pilots. Our home was about a mile away from the field. My schooling, the first 4 years were at Casting School, where we had 4 grades per classroom, 2 classrooms. And by the time you got to the 4th grade, you'd been over the subject 3 times before, because the teacher would take one class per row, and you'd rotate through the 4 rows and then back. When my sister, Peggy, my oldest sister, 7 years older than me, she was 17 and I was 10, but that's the first time one of my sisters had a date. That was a big deal in our family, and Peggy got lots of instructions, including one that when he brought her home, they could sit on the front porch in the swing and talk. They had to leave the light on in the porch. And I was really curious about all this. So I slipped out the back door. And there was a cedar tree that came up very close to the porch where they were on. And I went out and stayed in the shadows and crawled up really close to them, and was laying there listening to basically nothing. And all of a sudden, somebody stepped on me, and we went rolling. It was my mom. And we went rolling on the grass there, and then snuck off. We went back in and swore each other to secrecy. And the next morning at breakfast, well, Peggy, how did things go? She said, fine, except Bowser found that possum back there. He had a terrible fight with that possum behind the cedar tree while we were on the porch. I went to Shields High School in Seymour. Went home, usually rode my bike home for lunch. It just took a few minutes to go home and back. In those days, Dad was gone many days because he was a livestock trader specializing in mules. But in the Second World War, the Army, he was notified by the Army that they needed 1,600 mules to pull artillery pieces. The artillery at that time had been totally motorized, and it was sort of worthless in Italy, where they were fighting at the time. And within 2 weeks, Dad had accumulated the 1,600 mules, loaded them here in Columbus at the livery station. He built a chute so they could be loaded on train cars and got them off. I remember that very well. After the war, Dad ended up still owning the livery station, which lies just in the block southwest of the courthouse. Obviously did not meet city zoning, and in 47, 48, and 49, each year the city brought suit against him for breaking the zoning laws. Each time he won, because Dad's country lawyer could prove that it was used for the livestock continuously since pioneer days for livestock, and the zoning laws basically grandfathered in anything of that type. At the last suit, the city finally paid Dad what he asked. That ended the series of suits. My folks always told me that they did not care what I did when I grew up. They were very hopeful that perhaps I could be a minister or a lawyer or a doctor. And they said, one thing, the only thing we want you to promise us is you never will be a farmer. They said, in farming, you do not control your destiny. You could be the best farmer in the country, and if you don't get those rains, if the weather does not cooperate, you failed. And we want you to be doing something that will reward you for effort and work. So I took that to heart. I believe I would have loved farming. I loved what I did, and I certainly worked on the farm a lot. But I took their message to heart. I also knew I wanted to do church work of some type. So decided on being a medical missionary back early on in high school. I graduated in 1950, May of 1950, and I was in a hurry to get on with my education. Enrolled and got in IU the summer of 1950. Most of the other students that were in the dorm with me were young men who had gotten their basic degree and were teaching, and within 5 years of starting, they had to take courses and get a master's degree to continue on. So they were young men of that young age group who had families. Most of them also had joined the Indiana National Guard because teaching was not highly paid. They made a little extra money, and it took just 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks summer camp. In July, after I'd been in school about 3 weeks, the Korean War broke out. About a week after that, all of Indiana Guards were called up for active duty. And about 3 weeks after that, they had been shipped to Korea in time to be there when the Chinese came across the Yalu River, overran all the American positions. And about a third of them that I had become fairly good friends with were shipped back in coffins. And that was very impressive to me. I decided, and at that time, I was subject to the draft. The draft was mandatory those days. However, if you were in medical school, you were deferred to land medical school. I decided I should get in medical school the quickest way possible. So I took 3 years of work, which was required to get into medical school. I took that in 1.5 years, 2 years of school in 3 summers. I was accepted first in Washington University, St. Louis. I was refused at Chicago and accepted at IU. But at IU, they asked me, they said, we have never taken someone with just 2 years of pre-med. We will accept you, but you need to wait out 1 year, take whatever courses you want, and enter the next year. And they said, what do you plan to do in that interim year? And I said, well, I'll be finishing my first year at Washington University, St. Louis, since I'm accepted there. And they said, well, we'll reconsider, and they promptly sent me an admission notice for that year.
I think as working with the patients, we did a lot of direct patient care. When I was at the hospital here in Columbus, now it's gotten to be, all aides and other people, and the nurses are more. But anyway, to help people, I just have one that stuck with me forever. This lady was in a room, and she was so scared, and she was shaking, and she was just moaning and groaning. And I just walked in the room and put my hand on her, and she stopped. Everything was fine, and we talked for a while. So that really stuck with me.
First year in medical school was in Bloomington, did anatomy and basic biochemistry. Then the last 3 years at Indianapolis. I, in Indianapolis, got a job in the general hospital there, doing autopsies at night and holidays when the regular pathologists were not on duty, were not there. Did over 400 autopsies in the 4 years I was doing them there, but got room and board, which made it rather inexpensive to go there. I paid my way through everything except one semester. I needed tuition, all of tuition, and total tuition for that semester was $275, which is slightly less than today. And my folks had no problem with it. They paid that. I paid them back the next summer when I had a job, although they certainly did not demand repayment.
Walt got his active service time. He could go into the public health service. And he was sent out to Shiprock, New Mexico, where we spent our first 2 years out of our training. And that was interesting. They did not speak English. The hospital was in an old White House, and he was the only doctor for I don't know how many thousand Indians around there, Navajo and some Ute. And I delivered babies and did things that I really hadn't learned to do in training.
I saw during our service there, and we worked with several missionaries that were on the reservation. The missionaries there were much more hampered by lack of resources to do work than they were by lack of personnel wanting to do work as missionaries. Some of our experiences were not good. One of the mission men came in from about 90 miles away with a young girl that worked in his office, 16 years old, who had severe abdominal pain. He brought her in for emergency appendectomy. We got her in on the surgical table, and when I examined her, I found out she was just ready to have birth to a child, and they had no idea she was pregnant. Got one of the aides to give her nitrous oxide to relieve the discomfort, and got ready to do a delivery. And the missionary burst through the door, grabbed the mask, and tore it off her face, said, "She has sinned. Pain is God's way of punishing her for her sin. You must not give her any anesthetic." So I had kicked him down the back steps. We locked all the hospital doors, and I went ahead with the delivery. But that wasn't too unusual out there. The usual way to establish a mission was to go drill a water well. The Indians often had to go many tens of miles to get water. If you had a well, you had a lot of Indians coming to get water there. You'd establish your mission, and then what happened typically is 6 months later, getting water at the mission was restricted to members of the church that was established there. That is what made me think that maybe my calling should be to help provide resources for missions as opposed to being directly involved in the medical care, and that's where I made that big switch.
We have 4 children. We have 3 daughters, and the oldest is Susan in Easton, Maryland. She's a publisher editor and very adept at speaking. She got an internship with Senator John Glenn out of when she was in Miami University. So she went to Washington, and she stayed in the East Coast all that time. Nancy, the second daughter, is a pediatric ophthalmologist in Alexandria, Virginia. She has 3 children, and the 2 oldest ones are in different stages of becoming doctors. Cindy is our youngest daughter. She's in family practice. She went to Chicago Medical School, which is the school where my grandfather trained, and she has 2 boys. The oldest is in Missoula, Montana, learning to be a forester. The young one is a sophomore and is contemplating going into medicine, but has not decided. So, and our son, who was adopted, lives in Indianapolis, and he graduated from Purdue and called and said, "Now what should I do, Mom?" And I said, "Well, don't you have any idea what you want to do? I can't tell you." And he said, no. And I said, well, then go into Peace Corps, AmeriCorps, or something like that for a couple years. So he joined the Peace Corps and was assigned to Guatemala, and that's how we got our Guatemala connection. And he started, it was based on education, not medical, and started 18 kindergartens. Some of the girls were 12 years old or more. They'd never been to school before. So he really introduced education and started schools and did other work, irrigation, teaching. They planted the whole area where the natives lived had been deforested by the Mexicans. They came across and cut all the trees. So reforestation was one of the things we did one day. And I think the women learned that they could get some education too, and that was wonderful. And we've been down numerous times. Our oldest grandson went down one time with us, and we made aluminum ovens. They had usually built fires in the middle of the floor, and so people would step in it now and then, get a bad burn. So Willie trained them to make a upright. It was made of brick, and there was a place to put some wood in here, and then a grid where they could put their pots on it. And so our grandson, we made an oven that would sit on top of that. We had to put it together. We cut it out in a pattern and then had a door on it. And our grandson made chocolate chip cookies, showed the people how to do that, and baked them in the oven so they could see how it worked. So it was nice to be able to share that mission with our family. My mother went down about 4 times in her 90s. And she got along great. So that was one of our big highlights of the mission with Wally.
So you guys have been married for 67 years?
Yeah.
Can you talk about the keys to how you've gotten to 67 years together?
It's partly the commitment that you go in the beginning that this is the life pattern you've chosen and you stick with it. There are bumps, and we've been through counseling when we feel like we need that. So, but we don't just throw up our hands and run the other way. And so I think a little bit of that, we're both in the medical field, and Walt's been gone a lot. So, there are times, but we did take family trips that were wonderful. We've toured all around the country, and other countries. We've been to Germany several times. And we encouraged and participated in exchange programs where the people came to us, and a lot of people said, well, we can't afford to travel. And I say, well, then bring the people to you. And we've done that with 47 different countries, but we've also traveled all over.
One thing I miss a bit are what I'd call more adult sermons, such as Dennis McCarty was so good at, and he was the minister that was there when we first went, and I really enjoyed his adult sermons. However, I do believe that the emphasis now, which seems to be on the younger people, I think that's really the way a church should be. And so exactly what fits me at this stage in my life, I don't think is what the church should be doing, but I do enjoy at least some of the adult type sermons now and then.
I think they're just such wonderful people there. They're all different, and we are very good friends with, I am particularly of some, the Farleses and John Fisher, the Fisher family. They're huggers. I like to hug, so they're on my list every Sunday. And I like the fact that it's not a sermon. You do talks, and then we do things. We take care of actually working in the church, like instead of just going in and going home. You get involved. And I like that. And I like to be involved, even though I'm getting pretty old, to do some of the things that it's just a good feeling. It's like you going to meet with friends. And we try to go every Sunday.
On our third date, something happened that I found very amusing. We had done the movie deal. I'd taken her out to dinner. Third date, big deal. Anyway, we decided to go on a picnic at Turkey Run Park over near Terre Haute. Joanne fixed a picnic dinner. Her mom helped her. I hate eggs. I just never have liked eggs, do not like eggs, and therefore I could find all sorts of medical reasons why eggs should not be eaten, but mostly it's just I don't like them. And her mother found, I think, that if she was going with a guy that didn't like eggs, you know, something's wrong with people that don't like eggs. But anyway, we ended up over there with a fried chicken dinner that was delicious. But I was looking for a good place to spread the blanket and get the dinner out and have a meal. So went in. Most of the picnic tables were on a circular drive where you go in and circle in and then go out the end of the circle. But they had a few places where you just went in and then had to come back the same way. And I was interested in getting one of those because there was no traffic by you and I wanted some privacy. So we spread the blanket and got out the dinner, and Joanne was on the blanket and I was on the blanket, and I started nuzzling her a little bit. It was a third date, you know. And she, all of a sudden she says, "I can't do that. They're all looking." And I must have recoiled and jumped about 10 feet in the air because they're all looking. I was so careful nobody was around. And I looked up. Anyway, I'd put that blanket right in the middle of a family of prairie dogs. And they were all sitting right at the entry to their den, and their eyes are huge. So we had all these eyes around looking at us. And so I very properly had my dinner and went home. End of story. Except I did get married about 6 months later.
The prairie dogs came.
Yeah.
They didn't come to the wedding.
No, they weren't invited.